You have probably tried everything, not as a figure of speech, but literally. You have been attentive and you have been distant. You have been expressive and you have been reserved. You have shown up with grand gestures and you have shown up quietly. You have been emotionally available and you have pulled back to give space. You have communicated your needs clearly and you have swallowed your needs entirely. You have been patient when patience felt impossible and you have been direct when directness felt risky. And through all of it, through the full range of approaches, the careful calibrations, the genuine efforts to find the configuration that finally produces the consistent, present, mutually invested version of the avoidant you know is underneath all the distance. The results have been frustratingly inconsistent, good for a while and then not, warm and then cold, present and then gone. And the conclusion that most people reach after long enough in this specific exhausting cycle is that nothing works, that the avoidant is simply not capable of the consistent investment that a real relationship requires, that the pattern is immovable. That conclusion is partly right and partly wrong in ways that matter. The part that is right, no specific thing you do for an avoidant will produce sustained, consistent loyalty and presence. The grand gesture, the perfectly calibrated availability, the patient understanding, the space giving, the clear communication, none of these, as individual acts or approaches, will change the fundamental architecture of how an avoidant relates. The part that is wrong, the implication that avoidants are therefore not loyal at all, that they do not commit, that the defended, distant, managed connection version is the whole story of what they are capable of. Avoidants are deeply, specifically, often fiercely loyal, not to actions, not to demonstrations of love or effort or consistency, to something more specific and more fundamental than any of those. Something that most people never identify clearly enough to understand why everything else keeps failing to produce it. This conversation is about what that thing is. The foundation requires honesty about what avoidants are and are not, because the cultural conversation about avoidant attachment has developed some distortions in both directions that produce misunderstanding rather than clarity. On one side, avoidants are sometimes portrayed as fundamentally incapable of genuine connection, as emotionally hollow, as people who use others for comfort and convenience without any real capacity for the depth of feeling that loyalty requires. This portrayal is inaccurate. Avoidants feel deeply. Their emotional world is not shallow. In many cases, it is extraordinarily rich. A full, complex, often intense interior life that the defended exterior consistently misrepresents. The incapacity is not for feeling. It is for the specific forms of expression and consistency that feeling usually produces in people with more secure attachment. On the other side, avoidants are sometimes portrayed as wounded people who simply need the right partner with the right approach to finally unlock their capacity for genuine commitment. As people whose avoidance is entirely a surface phenomenon that will dissolve when they encounter sufficient patience and understanding, this portrayal is also inaccurate. The defensive architecture is not simply a surface protection waiting to be gently removed by the right person. It is deep and structural and requires the avoidant's own genuine, sustained personal engagement with it in order to change. No partner, however patient or understanding or perfectly calibrated, can do that work on behalf of the avoidant. The honest picture is more complicated than either distortion. Avoidants are genuinely feeling people with genuinely defended expression who are genuinely capable of deep loyalty to the specific thing this conversation is about, and who cannot access that loyalty through effort of will or through any particular approach from the person they are with. So what is the one thing avoidants are loyal to? It is not kindness. Many people in dynamics with avoidants are extraordinarily kind. The kindness is received, appreciated at some level, and does not produce sustained loyalty. It is not consistency. Many people offer consistent availability, consistent warmth, consistent effort. The consistency is relied upon, often taken for granted, and does not on its own produce the reciprocal consistency that loyalty requires. It is not understanding. The people who most deeply understand avoidant psychology, who can articulate the fear of closeness and the defensive architecture and the origins of the withdrawal with genuine compassion, often find that the understanding, however accurate and however kindly offered, does not produce the change it seems like it should produce. It is not passion. The intensity of feeling for an avoidant, expressed clearly and honestly, does not reliably move them toward the sustained presence that loyalty looks like. It is not patience. Extended, genuine, costly patience The willingness to absorb the pattern over long periods in the hope that the pattern will eventually change does not transform into avoidant loyalty. More often, it transforms into avoidant assumption, the assumption that the patience will continue indefinitely, that the connection will hold across the distance, because it always has. None of these things produce avoidant loyalty because none of these things address the specific thing that avoidant loyalty is organized around. Avoidants are loyal to authenticity, to the specific, rare, genuinely distinctive quality of a person who is completely, unperformably, consistently themselves, not performing a version of themselves calibrated to produce a specific response, not adjusting their self-presentation to fit the available relational space, not organizing their emotional expression around the management of the avoidance comfort level, simply being who they are, fully and without apology, in the specific way that is only possible for someone who has enough internal ground to not require external validation to sustain the being. This requires careful unpacking, because authenticity is a word that gets used loosely enough to lose its precision, and the precision matters here. Authenticity in this context is not simply honesty. Many people are honest with avoidance, and the honesty does not produce loyalty. It is not simply self-expression. Many people express themselves genuinely with avoidance, and the self-expression does not produce loyalty. The specific authenticity that avoidant loyalty organizes around is the authenticity of self-possession, of someone whose sense of who they are does not depend on the avoidance response to them, who is the same person, essentially fundamentally in the qualities that define them, whether the avoidant is warm or cold, present or withdrawn, engaged or managing distance, who does not reorganize themselves around the avoidance emotional climate, who does not expand when the warmth arrives and contract when the cold comes, who simply continues being who they are, with the specific, steady, entirely unperformed quality of someone who is not using the relationship as the primary source of their sense of self. That quality is rare, genuinely rare, not because people lack the desire for it, because developing it requires the specific, demanding, often uncomfortable work of building enough internal ground to sustain selfhood independently of relational validation. And most people, understandably, humanly, look for significant portions of their sense of self in their relational world, in the feedback of how they are received, in the quality of the connections they maintain, in the specific, ordinary, entirely reasonable way that relational experience shapes and informs and partially constitutes the self. The avoidant, whose defensive architecture is exquisitely attuned to the quality of other people's self-possession, can feel immediately and automatically whether the person they are with is operating from genuine internal ground or from the relational feedback loop. And the operating from genuine internal ground produces in the avoidant a specific response that the operating from relational feedback does not. Why is the avoidant specifically loyal to this quality? Why does genuine self-possession, of all the things a person could bring to a relationship with an avoidant, produce the specific loyalty that nothing else produces? The answer is in the avoidant's deepest fear, the fear that has been running beneath all the patterns and all the defensive architecture and all the managed distance since the earliest formative experiences. The fear that closeness means the loss of self. This fear is not irrational. It was formed in response to real experiences in which closeness did mean a form of self-loss, in which the emotional environment required the young person to subordinate their own needs and expressions and interior reality to the management of the relational environment, in which being genuinely themselves was not safe or not welcome or not compatible with the maintenance of the connection they needed to survive. The fear, formed in those real experiences, generalized into the operating principle of adult attachment. Closeness threatens selfhood. Intimacy requires self-sacrifice. Love, at its depth, demands a portion of who you are as the price of the other person's continued engagement. The avoidant has been managing this fear through the defensive architecture, through the maintained distance that prevents closeness from reaching the depth at which the feared self-loss occurs, through the withdrawal that happens reliably at the moments when the connection deepens towards something real, through the entire elaborate, energy-consuming system of keeping the connection at a managed level at which the fear does not fully activate. And then they encounter someone who is genuinely, self-possessedly themselves, who does not require the avoidant to be anything other than what they are, who does not press toward the avoidant with the weight of need that would confirm the fear, who does not reorganize around the avoidant's emotional climate in ways that create the specific subtle pressure of being responsible for another person's sense of self, who simply is full, present, entirely their own. And the fear does not activate in the same way. Not because the closeness is less real. Because the person the avoidant is close to is not presenting the specific conditions that the fear was formed in response to, is not requiring the self-sacrifice that the fear predicted closeness would demand, is not pressing the avoidant to be different or perform differently or manage their emotional expression to maintain the connection, is simply being themselves and allowing the avoidant to be themselves and experiencing whatever is genuinely present between two people who are both actually there. The defensive architecture built to manage the specific threat of self-loss through closeness does not have the same urgency in this environment. The threat is not activating at the same level. The withdrawal that the threat usually produces is less automatic, and in the reduced automaticity of the withdrawal, something becomes available that the defensive architecture was always preventing. Genuine presence, genuine engagement, genuine loyalty to a person who has demonstrated through the sustained quality of their self-possession that being close to them does not require the avoidant to lose themselves in the process. This is the mechanics of it, but the mechanics require practical grounding. Because the understanding that avoidants are loyal to authenticity can remain an interesting intellectual observation without producing anything useful if it does not translate into something concrete about what this means for how you actually move through a relationship with an avoidant. The first concrete implication is that trying to be what you think the avoidant needs is counterproductive, not just ineffective, actively counterproductive. The calibration of yourself to the avoidant's apparent preferences, the adjusting of your emotional expression, your availability, your level of need to something that seems compatible with the avoidant's tolerance produces exactly the kind of self-managing, other-oriented, relational feedback-dependent presence that the avoidant's deeper self does not trust. The calibrated version of you is not you, and the avoidant, whose attunement to authenticity is one of the most developed capacities of their interior life, knows the difference between the calibrated version and the genuine version, even when they cannot articulate the difference. The second concrete implication is that having needs is not the problem. This is one of the most damaging misunderstandings in the landscape of avoidant dynamics. Many people conclude, from the pattern of the avoidant withdrawing when needs are expressed, that the needs themselves are the problem, that having less need, or expressing it less, is the path to the avoidant's genuine engagement. This conclusion is wrong. The problem is not the presence of needs. The problem is the specific quality of need that is dependent, that communicates through its expression that the avoidant's response to the need determines the person's fundamental sense of okayness. That need, the dependent need, that is what activates the withdrawal. Because the dependent need communicates that the avoidant is responsible for the person's sense of self, which is the specific burden the avoidant's deepest fear told them that closeness imposes. Need that is expressed from genuine self-possession, need that is honest and specific and communicated without the undertow of dependency, without the implicit "you must respond this way or I will not be okay" quality, does not activate the withdrawal in the same way. Because it is not asking the avoidant to be responsible for someone else's self. It is simply communicating honestly, from a person who is fundamentally okay, what would be welcome. The difference between these two forms of need expression is real, and it is felt by the avoidant even when it is not consciously identified. The dependent form activates the fear, the self-possessed form does not. The third concrete implication is about disagreement, about conflict. About the moments in the dynamic when what is genuine for you is not comfortable for the avoidant, when your honest perspective or your legitimate need or your accurate assessment of something in the dynamic is in tension with the avoidant's preferred version of events. Most people in dynamics with avoidance learn to manage these moments, to soften the genuine perspective, to frame the accurate assessment in ways that reduce its friction with the avoidant's comfort, to choose, in the moment of tension, the accommodation of the avoidant's comfort over the honest expression of their own genuine position. This accommodation is understandable. It is motivated by genuine care and genuine desire to maintain the connection. And it is, in the specific way that all the other calibrations are, counterproductive to the avoidant loyalty that it is trying to preserve. Because the avoidant is loyal to authenticity, and the person who consistently softens their genuine perspective to accommodate the avoidant's comfort is not being authentic, is being careful, is producing the specific managed, other-oriented presence that the avoidant's deeper self does not trust as genuinely self-possessed. The person who disagrees from genuine self-possession, who maintains their honest perspective without aggression and without the need for the avoidant to agree with it, who can hold a different view without requiring the avoidant to be wrong, who can say, "This is how I see it, and I notice you see it differently, and I am not going to pretend I see it your way." That person is demonstrating authenticity in one of its most demanding forms. The form that is most costly to maintain and most unambiguously genuine when it is maintained, and the avoidant's deeper self, which is loyal to authenticity above all else, responds to this form of genuine self-possession with something that is not activated by accommodation. With respect, with the specific, privately held, often unexpressed but genuinely present quality of regarding someone as a person rather than as a managed connection. The fourth concrete implication is about what happens when the avoidant withdraws, when the pattern runs, when the cold arrives and the distance increases and the managed version of the connection reasserts itself. The person operating from relational feedback adjusts, pursues, softens, reaches, does the specific, predictable, entirely understandable things that the nervous system produces when the connection it is attached to becomes distant, and the pursuing, the softening, the reaching, while humanly understandable, communicates to the avoidant that the person's sense of self is organized around the connection's temperature, that when it goes cold, they go cold too. That the avoidant is responsible for the quality of their interior experience, that the fear of self-loss was right. The person operating from genuine self-possession does something different, not dramatically different. Not the performed indifference of someone who has decided not to react in order to produce a specific effect. The genuine, organic, unperformed different of someone who continues being themselves when the avoidant withdraws. Who does not expand when the warmth arrives and contract when the cold comes? Who maintains the same essential quality of presence, whether the avoidant is fully engaged or managing distance? Who is, in the specific and demonstrable sense, not dependent on the avoidant's temperature to sustain their own internal warmth? This does not mean the withdrawal does not affect them. It does. Genuine attachment is affected by the behavior of the person it is attached to. The genuine self-possession is not the absence of being affected. It is the maintenance of fundamental okayness alongside being affected. The capacity to feel the impact of the withdrawal without that impact determining the quality of the person's basic sense of self. When the avoidant encounters this quality, when the withdrawal does not produce the expected pursuing, the expected softening, the expected demonstration that the avoidance distance is causing distress, the pattern runs into the same condition that genuine self-possession always produces. The conditions the pattern requires are not present. The predictable investment is not there. The structural foundation of managed distance is not being provided. And the avoidant, whose loyalty is organized around the authenticity of genuine self-possession, encounters the most compelling available evidence that this person is the real thing, not performing, not calibrating, not managing themselves to accommodate the pattern, simply being who they are, genuinely, unperformably, consistently. There is something important to say about the difference between genuine self-possession and the performance of it that presents as self-possession, because the difference is real and matters more than almost anything else in understanding what actually produces avoidant loyalty. The performance of self-possession is the person who has understood that appearing less available, less affected, less organized around the avoidance responses produces certain effects, and who deploys that appearance with the goal of those effects. Who does not text back immediately because not texting back immediately seems to work? Who mentions other people or other options because creating a sense of competition seems to activate interest? Who performs busyness and fullness and independence because these things seem to signal the self-possession that produces avoidant engagement? The avoidant, whose attunement to authenticity is one of the sharpest available capacities in their interior life, feels the performance, not always immediately, not always consciously, but the performance has a quality that genuine self-possession does not have. It has the quality of something being maintained, of something that required a decision, of something that is organized around the avoidance response, even while it performs not being organized around the avoidance response. The performance is still other-directed, still calibrated, still fundamentally about managing the dynamic, rather than genuinely inhabiting a life. The genuine version has a different quality. It is simply the natural expression of someone who is actually there, actually invested in their own actual life, actually curious about their own actual experience, actually building something that is genuinely theirs. The difference is not in what it looks like from the outside, It is in whether the interior experience matches the exterior presentation, whether the life is actually happening or being performed. Avoidants are loyal to the life that is actually happening. All of this converges on something that is worth stating simply, because the simplicity is the point and the complexity of the preceding discussion can obscure it. You cannot make an avoidant loyal to you through anything you do for them, offer them, give them, demonstrate to them, or perform for them. The doing and the offering and the giving and the demonstrating and the performing are all organized around them, are all expressions of the relational feedback dependence that the avoidant's deeper self does not trust, are all in the specific and fundamental sense not the thing the avoidant is loyal to. You can become a person that an avoidant is loyal to, not through anything you do for them, through the genuine, daily, unglamorous, internally demanding work of being genuinely, completely, self-possessedly yourself, of building enough internal ground that your sense of who you are does not depend on the avoidant's engagement with you to remain stable, of developing the specific, hard-won, entirely real quality of someone who is there if the connection is genuinely mutual and not there if it is not. Who loves genuinely without making the love a dependency? Who needs honestly without making the need a claim? Who is present fully without making the presence a demand? That person, genuinely that person, not performing being that person, is the only person that avoidant loyalty consistently organizes around. Not because that person has found the technique, because that person is actually real in the specific way the avoidant's deeper self has been scanning for the whole time. Real, present, unperformed, genuinely themselves. The loyalty is to that, it was always to that, and the path to it is not through anything you do for the avoidant. It is through everything you do for yourself. The building of the genuine ground, the development of the real self-possession, the daily, honest, unglamorous work of becoming more fully and more genuinely and more completely yourself. That work produces the person avoidants are loyal to, not as a side effect, as its direct and primary result. The avoidance loyalty is, in the end, the recognition of something genuinely worth being loyal to. And that thing is the full, authentic, completely inhabited version of you, which was always the answer. Not to the question of how to make an avoidant loyal, to the much more important question of who you are becoming. The becoming is the answer. To both questions simultaneously, the becoming is not a destination that announces its own arrival. This is worth saying plainly, because the language of personal transformation, including the language of this conversation, can accumulate into something that sounds more certain and more complete than the actual lived experience of genuine growth tends to feel. The actual lived experience tends to feel ordinary, incremental, sometimes indistinguishable from inside it from simply continuing to exist. The days in which the genuine self-possession is being built are not in most cases days that feel like building. They feel like getting through, like making the choice again, like noticing the pull toward the old configuration and redirecting again, like being imperfect and returning to the honest position again. The accumulation of those ordinary days is the building, not the dramatic days, the undramatic ones, the ones that do not produce confirmation or validation, or the specific satisfying quality of progress being legible from the inside. This is important to hold alongside everything else this conversation has been saying about authenticity and self-possession and the kind of genuine groundedness that avoidant loyalty organizes around. Because if the holding out for the genuine version of yourself is itself being organized around the goal of becoming the person avoidants are loyal to, if the whole project of self-reclamation is secretly a more sophisticated version of doing things for the avoidant, then it is not genuine self-possession. It is the same other-directed project wearing different clothes. Genuine self-possession is for you, not for what it produces in the avoidant, not for the loyalty it might eventually generate. For you, because it is better to be genuinely yourself than to be the managed, calibrated, other-organized version of yourself. Because the genuine life is more worth living than the performed one, regardless of whether any particular avoidant recognizes the difference. Because the internal ground that self-possession requires is valuable in itself rather than as a means to someone else's loyalty. If that motivation is clear, if the work of becoming is genuinely for yourself rather than as a technique for producing avoidant loyalty, then the byproduct of that work, which includes being the kind of person avoidant loyalty organizes around, is exactly that, a byproduct. Real, genuine, but not the point. There is something about the specific quality of avoidant loyalty when it does emerge that deserves honest description. because the expectation of what avoidant loyalty looks like tends to be shaped by the template of secure attachment, loyalty. And the two are genuinely different in ways that matter for recognizing the real thing when it arrives. Secure attachment loyalty tends to be visible, declared, expressed through the specific, legible, socially recognizable behaviors of choosing someone consistently, through the explicit verbal and behavioral commitment that secure attachment makes possible, through the daily, ordinary, uncomplicated evidence of being reliably there. Avoidant loyalty tends to be quieter, less declared, often entirely without the explicit verbal acknowledgement that secure attachment would produce. It shows up in specific behaviors rather than declarations. In the consistency of return, the not quite being able to fully leave that the avoidant who genuinely values someone demonstrates even when the defensive architecture keeps them from staying in the way they would like to stay. In the specific quality of being honest with someone in ways they are not honest with others, in the small unannounced acts of care that come from someone who has not verbally committed, but whose behavior reveals a commitment that the words are not yet available to carry. In the tolerance for the person's full authentic presence, the avoidant who is loyal to someone, genuinely loyal, not temporarily activated, demonstrates that loyalty partly through their specific unusual tolerance for that person's complete self, for the disagreement and the full need expression and the honest perspective and the refusal to calibrate. The avoidant who is loyal to someone does not require that person to manage themselves down to an acceptable level, does not withdraw reliably when the authentic self is present, does not produce the characteristic defensive distancing in response to the specific person's genuine fullness. This tolerance is one of the most honest indicators of avoidant loyalty available, because the withdrawal is so automatic, so deeply grooved, so reliably produced by the approach of genuine intimacy, that its specific absence in the presence of a particular person is meaningful. It is the pattern failing to run in the usual way, the defense not activating at the usual level. The architecture encountering the specific quality of presence that is less threatening to its maintenance, because it is less organized around requiring anything from the avoidant that would constitute the feared self-loss. When you notice this specific tolerance in an avoidant, when the withdrawal that usually arrives reliably does not arrive, or arrives and recedes more quickly than usual, or arrives and is actively worked against rather than simply followed, you are seeing the loyalty in one of its most genuine forms, not the declared commitment, the behavioral evidence of a system that is choosing differently in the presence of this specific person. The practical question that follows from everything this conversation has addressed is the one that has the most relevance to daily life. Not the philosophical question of what avoidants are loyal to. The practical question of what to actually do, and the honest answer is less dramatic than the conversation might have suggested. Do the things that make your life look self-possessed from the outside. The things that actually produce genuine engagement with your own interior, your own interests, your own developing sense of what matters and what you want to build. The distinction between these two is the distinction between the genuine and the performed that runs through this entire conversation. Genuine engagement with your own life means different things for different people. It is not a formula. It is the honest answer to the question of what you would be doing, what you would be building, what you would care about if the avoidance engagement with you were not a variable you were tracking. If the dynamics outcome were not something you are organizing any portion of your daily experience around, what then? What is actually genuinely interesting to you? What project actually has your honest engagement? What relationship in your life actually receives your real attention rather than the residual attention left over after the dynamic has taken its portion? Those things, do those things, not as a strategy. Because they are the content of your actual life and they deserve the actual investment that your actual life deserves. There is something about the longer-term experience of being in a dynamic with an avoidant that this conversation has not directly addressed and that deserves honest attention before concluding. The longer-term experience tends to produce a specific, slow, difficult to attribute erosion of confidence in your own genuine preferences. The chronic experience of calibrating, of adjusting your self-expression to what the dynamic can hold, eventually reaches below the level of deliberate adjustment and begins to affect the underlying sense of what your genuine preferences actually are. You become uncertain about what you actually want, about which needs are genuine and which are excessive, about whether your sense of what adequate love looks like is accurate or inflated, about whether the version of yourself that you think is the genuine version or a constructed version that you have been defending without adequate evidence. This erosion is one of the most subtle and most serious effects of extended time in a dynamic organized around the management of your authentic self to accommodate another person's defensive architecture. And it is worth naming specifically because the path of recovery from it is not simply the decision to be more authentic. The decision requires some access to the genuine preferences that were being suppressed. And if the suppression went on long enough, that access is not immediately available. The recovery of access to genuine preferences is slow. It is the patient, sometimes surprising, often undramatic, process of noticing what you actually respond to when you are not in the managed state. What genuinely interests you, what genuinely angers you, what genuinely delights you. What you actually think, prior to the editing process that the dynamic installed, about the things that the dynamic kept requiring you to have softer opinions about. These genuine responses are still there. They did not disappear. They were suppressed, managed, qualified into something more acceptable. But they remain. And in the space that the genuine shift toward your own life creates, in the bandwidths reclaimed from the monitoring of the dynamic, they begin to resurface. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes more strongly than you expected. Sometimes in ways that surprise you with how much genuine feeling was being held in compression. Allow the surfacing. The genuine preferences, returning to legibility, are the content of the authentic self that avoidant loyalty organizes around, not just for the avoidant, for you, for the quality of your own life. For the specific, irreplaceable experience of being genuinely yourself in a world that generally rewards the managed version. The conclusion of this conversation circles back to the beginning. Avoidants are loyal to one thing. That thing is the genuine, unperformed, self-possessed authenticity of a person who is completely themselves regardless of the avoidance response. But that conclusion, examined honestly, is less about avoidance than it might initially appear. Because the genuine, unperformed, self-possessed authenticity that avoidant loyalty organizes around is not a quality developed for the purpose of producing avoidant loyalty. It is a quality developed for the purpose of living a genuine life. The person who is genuinely themselves, who has done the work of building the internal ground, recovering the genuine preferences, tolerating the nervous system's transition, maintaining the honest standards, that person is not primarily interesting because of what they produce in avoidance. They are interesting because of what they produce in themselves, because of what their life becomes when it is organized around genuine inhabiting rather than managed performing. The avoidance loyalty, when it arrives, is the recognition of something genuine, a genuine person, genuinely present, genuinely invested in their own real life, genuinely offering something real rather than something managed. The genuine something is the point. Always was. The avoidance recognition of it is the byproduct. Build the genuine something. Not for the avoidant, for the life. The actual, specific, genuinely yours, worthfully inhabiting life. That is the only loyalty worth organizing your becoming around. Your own. To yourself. Completely and without apology. Everything else follows from that. Including occasionally the loyalty of someone who finally encountered the real thing and recognized it for what it was. Worth staying for. Worth showing up for. Worth finally, genuinely choosing.